So let's go to the yarn. I'm going to be making a sweater for myself, at least for the English version of the live. I'm going to be doing a Spanish version as well, and I'm just going to make one for my kid. So I'm not working with two adult patterns simultaneously. But this is the yarn I'm using. You can use any yarn you want, like truly any yarn at all, in any weight. To show you, well, here, to show you this. The one that I'm going to be using for my sweater is a DK yarn, so this is a size 3. But the one I'm going to be using for my daughter is going to be a size 4, so it's going to be this one. So as you can see, I'm just using two different sizes, but we're going to be using measurements, so it really won't matter what yarn size you use or what yarn weight you use. So yeah, but to start, you're going to have to look at your yarn label and determine what yarn size this is and what hook size you're going to need. So this one recommends a 3 to 4 millimeter hook. Normally, if I want to make something that's kind of like a lace type pattern, I'm going to go with about 2 millimeters larger than what the label recommends, which in this case, you know, it's 3 to 4 millimeters. For this one, you can use whatever hook you want. This is going to be a Tunisian crochet pattern, so we're going to be using a Tunisian crochet hook. Now you can either use these long aluminum ones that have the little cap at the end, or you can use the corded ones. Whichever you prefer is fine. You can play around with different sizes and just make a small swatch and determine what the look and feel of your fabric, and then just go from there. Before we get started, we should probably talk about maybe setting up your pattern measurements and all of that fun stuff. So one of the first things I do when I start working on patterns is I have to determine what type of pattern I'm going to make. And again, today we're going to be working on a boat neck, I guess top, sweater, whatever you want to call it. The thickness of it will depend on you or whatever yarn you choose. So it could be a sweater, it could just be a light fall top. It's up to you. But you're going to need some measurements. So I took Dylan's measurements, and that's my 7-year-old. So I'm going to be working on hers, like I said, in the Spanish version of this live. But I will show it to you. I don't have it yet because the live doesn't happen until Wednesday. So I'll show it to you in future videos so that you can see the differences between my size and her size. And then I'm going to be using my measurements. So we have to determine how we are going to build this pattern in order to figure out what measurements we're going to need. And also, you know, what size we're going to make it in, because it's going to be a little bit different if you're going to make it for like a child versus an adult. You're going to need slightly different measurements. Like you don't need necessarily the bust measurement for a child, whereas you will if you're going to make it for an adult. Stuff like that. All right, so in order to make this particular pattern, because I was trying to select something that was going to be simple and very easy to adjust, just to kind of get the feel for what it is to write your own pattern, how it is to figure out what measurements you need, what yarn you need, all of that good stuff. So I try to go for something super simple. So we're going to make this by creating 2 blocks of fabric. So you're going to do a large rectangle, and I'll talk to you about the measurements in a minute. So we're going to construct 2 large rectangles, and then we're going to layer them together and then stitch along the top, and then from there add the sleeves and all of that fun stuff. So the measurements you're going to need for this, you're going to need your shoulder measurement. Now here, if I move this over to the side, I grabbed a dry erase markers too so we could kind of try to draw along as we went. So if this is you, let me see where it's at here on the camera so you guys can actually see what it is I'm drawing. Alright, there we go. So here's the person. Alright, so the first measurement you're going to need is the shoulders. Now, this one, if you have someone to help you take the back measurement, that's just a little bit easier to take than the front. If you're by yourself, you know, stand in front of the mirror and take your measurement. So you're going to need to go from one shoulder, here, you can't see it, it's too thin, to the other shoulder, and then just across. So you'll need this measurement, whether it's in centimeters, inches, whatever measurements you use, or I guess whatever system you use, whatever it is, use that. The next measurement, if you're going to be making this for an adult, is going to be the bust. So you're going to measure here, and it's not the circumference. You're going to be measuring just across, from just under your arm to the other side. So this is not a circumference measurement, it's just across. We're going to use this for one of the panels and this for the other. So that's why. What are the other measurements? You're going to need, well, you're going to have to decide if you're going to make this garment as a long sleeve or short sleeve, and then we go from there. Oh, I can see Biba. Hi, Habiba. I was wanting to see you. All right, so we have, where are we at? The arm length. Okay, so for the arm length, let me see if I need anything else before I erase all this. Yes, actually, I should. It's just the length in general. So for the length in general, determine how long a garment you want. So measure from your shoulders to however long you want it to be. So whether you want it to be all the way down your hip, or if you want it to be longer than that, whatever it is you want as a measurement, as far as a measurement goes, that's what you're going to determine, and then you're going to measure that length. So all the way down here, that's just going to be your length. And then for the arm, that one is a little bit different because you're going to need to, here, let's erase this. You're going to need 3 measurements. Oh, I'm sorry, I hit the tripod. You're going to need 3 measurements for this. So when you're standing in front of the mirror, and I think it was here where I drew it. So here's one arm, that's terribly drawn. And then here's the other arm. You're going to hold your arm out. There you go. And you're going to measure. This one is a circumference measurement, so you're going to measure around the widest part of your arm. So this is going to give you just the measurement for the armhole. So take this measurement, and then you're also going to need to measure the length. Now, if you're going to do a short sleeve, you can just measure it from here. If you're going to be doing something that's a long sleeve, you will need to bend your elbow. So when you're standing there, just make sure that you bend it and that you're holding onto like your hip or wherever down here, kind of like when you're angry with your kids, like that. So just bend your elbow and measure around from there. So you're going to measure from the top of your shoulder around the bend of your elbow and then down to your wrist. So measure all the way around that way. That's going to be the sleeve length. So jot that one down. And then the last one is just around the wrist. And it's not necessarily the wrist because this is not knitting and it doesn't have the same type of stretch as knitting. So if you measure around the wrist, what's going to happen is you're going to end up with a garment that's too tight and you won't be able to get your hand out. So bunch up your hand, like when you're going to, stick your hand into the sleeve, bunch up your hand and measure in this area, wherever it is the widest. And we're going to use that as the wrist measurement, just to make sure that you can put your hand in and out of the garment, if, that makes any sense. All right, but once you have those measurements, and I think I've got them all, let's see, it was the shoulders, and yes. All right, so that's all we need. So those are the measurements we're going to need, at least the most basic measurements for most garments that you crochet. Yes, I mean, it's not the same for sewing. I'm sure you need a whole lot of other measurements as well for sewing, but crochet is a little bit more simple when you're designing a garment. So let's move on from there. Hi, Chandra. Hello. All right, so getting started. So before you actually begin to crochet your garment, you need to test your stitch. You can choose any stitch you want. So for this one, I got the recommendation to use like a, oh, well, thank you, Habiba. I'm hoping so. I'm trying to make this simple, well, as simple as possible, and then we can make more complex patterns as we go. What was I saying? Oh, yes. Okay, so we have to go back to the stitch. And I wanted to do something with netting because since fall's coming and we don't want to do anything too thick right now. So you're going to have to play around with your stitch a little bit. That means you're going to probably need to switch between different hook sizes and just swatch it out. Now when I swatch, I know there are some folks that swatch and they just actually leave the swatch. I don't. I use the same yarn I'm going to use for my sweater and then rewrap it and make another one. So that's normally what I do. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. It's up to you. So you're going to grab your yarn and whatever hook size you've selected, and we're going to go from there. So for this one, I don't want it to be, the bead's going to hit the table a few times as I crochet. I don't really want to do that. So there we go. So the first thing you're going to do when you swatch is just make a chain and count how many stitches you're using. So I'm going to make a chain of about, let's go with maybe 10 stitches or so. Let's see where we end up. And you have to keep in mind the multiples for your stitch. So we're going to be using if you are, I don't know if you guys have been following the sampler throw series that I've been putting up. We're going to be using stitch number 13, and that's the one with, let me see if I have a sample. I should have pulled this out before I did the live. I completely forgot that I have a sample for that stitch. But, oh, here it is. It is this stitch right here. So, I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is the stitch we're going to use for this pattern. Again, you can use any stitch you want, but you are going to have to mind the multiples for whatever stitch you use. This one is worked in even multiples, so that's why we're going to make a chain of about 10 stitches, make a small swatch, and then the reason we're going to make the swatch is, one, not only so that we can see what our fabric is going to look like, it also is going to help us determine whether we're going to switch our hook size, whether we want it to be lacier or whether we want it to be a little tighter, whatever it is. That's going to help us determine our hook size. It's also going to help us determine the shrink rate, because you'll see here in a minute what I mean. So we're going to make our chain. So yarn over, you make your slip knot, and it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So I actually have to go through and do all of this. I'm used to doing like the tutorials where I film it and then I can cut off all the counting and all of that stuff, but yeah, so let's just keep it nice and short so I don't have to sit there and count forever. Alright, so once you've made your chain, we're going to measure it, because for this swatch we have to determine our shrink rate. So we're just going to lay it flat. You're going to need your measuring tape and just measure how wide that thing is. So here we go. So we got 3 inches. And just keep that number in your mind, alright? We're going to create our foundation row. Now this is just a regular foundation row. So you're going to insert your hook into, not the first stitch, but the second one. So insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then just repeat this with every stitch of the row. So we should have 10 loops, or however many loops or stitches you chained on your hook by the time you're done. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Great, we're set. Our return pass is going to be a regular return pass. So for this, you're going to yarn over, pull through 1, and the rest of these loops, you're just going to yarn over and pull through 2. That way you are left with just the 1 loop on your hook. Alright, so here's our foundation row. And then we're going to begin with the stitch. Now for this stitch, it's a 5-row repeat. So the first few rows, row number 1 is purl. So it's a purl stitch all the way across. Row number 2 is Tunisian simple stitch. Then it's another purl stitch. And then we have the 2 lace rows, which are row number 4, row number 5. And it's Tunisian simple stitch, 2 together, then yarn over. And for the next row, you invert those stitches. So we're going to be working on them right here, so no worries if you have no idea what I'm talking about. So first things first, this is the row of purl stitches. So you're going to skip the first vertical stitch because we have it here on our hook, and you're just going to purl. So reverse yarn over, insert the hook into that second vertical stitch. Now we've got the 2 legs, so for those of you that are a little bit newer to the world of Tunisian crochet, you're going to insert your hook behind the top leg of the stitch, release your yarn, pull it under like so, and then yarn over and pull up a loop. So that is your purl stitch, and you're just going to repeat it in all of the vertical stitches of the row. So reverse yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, let your yarn go, and then just pull up like this. So there we go. So I don't know if it's, for the tutorials that I've been doing, at least for the series, what is it, the throw series? I don't know if it's been very helpful to just kind of overview them. All of the different stitches, like the purled and the Tunisian simple stitch, which I know a lot of you guys have done a lot, but I'm trying to make them shorter, so let's see. Oh, there we go. Oh no, you're stash diving. I totally feel that, but that's okay. If you don't have enough yarn, you can always make your sample and then go from there. Just see how much your shrink rate is, and then we can start determining how big a garment you want. So, you know what, let me finish this row and we'll talk about it actually. Once you get to the end of the row, you're going to have this last stitch like this. Just cast on into this final stitch, and there is your row. You should have the same number of loops as you did in the previous row, so it should be still the 10. So now to answer Marika's question real quick. So to determine this, you are still going to need your swatch. There's a bit of math involved here. So if you're not much of a math person, this might not be the most exciting part of pattern writing. So you can always buy a lot of yarn and just to make sure you have enough. Get more than what you think you need, and then you can always return the extra. Or you can math it out. And to math it out, so let's see if I can go through like a shorter process so it's not so daunting, because it can be, oh hi Isla, it's a little bit daunting, or at least it can be. So when you take your measurements, you're going to have to draw out the garment, I guess, or a small kind of sample of the garment. So let's see, I've got, so for my back piece, the back piece is, oh, here's the back piece. Like I said, it's going to be basically 2 rectangles. So we'll draw them this way. All right, and then you're going to need, I'll draw all this on this side, a front piece. All right, so this is the front, and this is the back. Okay, so for the front, let's see, I want to make a sweater, and I have found 5 donuts. I don't know, well, I'm not sure, Monica, that's what we're going to find out, no worries. So here, just hang on with me for a second, and then we'll figure out if you have enough yarn for this. All right, so you have your 2 sections, which is what we're going to be working on, or the main parts of the sweater that we're going to be creating. So the front measurements, take your length, so right here, for me that was, what, 23 inches, because I use inches. If you use centimeters, do this with centimeters. And then across, I'm going to be using the bust measurement for the front of the garment. That's just to give you space, you know, for, well, the bust. So for the bust measurement, I have, what did I put on here? 18 inches. And now for my back piece, thank you. All right, and we're going to need, back here, all right, that's also going to be 23 inches. My goodness, I need to practice on my penmanship. And across, for a cross on the back piece, it's just going to be your shoulder measurement. So for me, it was 15 inches. There we go. And then you're going to get the area. So multiply this by this and get your area. And you're going to do the same for this. Multiply this by this and get your area. And then you're going to, so I'm going to put area 1 and area 2. And then add these 2 together. So it's going to be this area plus this area. It's going to give you just the total amount. Or the surface area of the front part and the back part of your sweater. And then you're going to have the sleeves. So this is just for the front of the sweater. Let me erase this. There we go. Oh, I'm sorry, I know it's moving the camera quite a bit. I am so sorry. All right, once you've got that, now for the sleeve, you're going to need to take, and this is, we're still calculating approximately how much yarn you're going to need. So here we go. So the sleeve is going to be worked as a trapezoid, and it's going to have a series of decreases. And remember that this is just an estimate. You can allow for positive ease if you want to. I don't typically allow too much for it. Oh, well, thank you, Monica. I don't typically allow too much ease, but that's kind of because I adjust as I go. So if you're more comfortable doing it and you have more experience, then why not? But let's see, where were we? Oh, yes. So you're going to need, for this one, it's going to be the measurement of the armhole. So for my measurement, it was 15 inches? Yeah. So you're going to take 15 inches here. And then the wrist, I think I had it at 8 inches. And then right here we have, what was my arm length? 24. So again, you're going to need the area of this space. Do's and don'ts. Thanks, Steve. What are some of the, let's see, some do's and don'ts. Yeah, if you can give me some examples, I could try to cover some of those. All right, so you get the area of this, and then you're gonna have to multiply this area by 2 because you're gonna have the 2 sleeves. So once you determine the area of the sleeve, you're gonna do that, area times 2, and you're going to add this to the amount of fabric you needed for the front and the back part of the sweater. Now, if you intend to add anything to any garment, like pockets, or you want to add some trim, then, you know, get an extra skein or ball of yarn or hank or whatever it is, just to make sure you have enough. But that gives you roughly about how much area you need. Now, you're still not done. There's still more math. That's what I'm saying. This is kind of like a daunting process. So I typically don't do it. I just buy a ton of yarn and hope for the best. It doesn't always work out. Now, let's see. Tunisian I find is difficult to gauge. Yeah, I find it's difficult to gauge as well. All right, so once you've got that, you're going to work on your sample. And then once we're done with the sample, we're going to continue on how to calculate the amount of yarn you need, because you actually need the sample and you're going to need to weigh it. So you're going to, if you go by weight, it's a little bit easier, because then you get the area of your sample and then the weight, and you multiply that by the area of your garment, and that gives you an approximate weight that you need in yarn. And most of the yarn, at least in the US, I know when you purchase yarn in Mexico, you purchase it by weight, and I think it's like that in some Latin American countries. But here in the US, a lot of the times it's yardage. So you'll have, you know, you need 142 yards for something or whatever, but it's got the weight right here. So if you take the weight of your sample in grams and then multiply that by the area, that will give you approximately how much yarn you might need. So I don't know if that kind of made it somewhat clear. I hope I didn't confuse anyone. But like I said, it's kind of a daunting process. So, but it's doable, and that kind of helps sometimes if you want to buy a more specific quantity of yarn. All right, but back to our sample. So for anyone that's joined, we're using the stitch number 13 from the Afghan sampler. All right, so we're going to work on a return pass, and this is just the same return pass that we've done for just a regular return pass, which is the yarn over, pull through 1, then yarn over, pull through 2, until you get to the end. All right, so row number 2 for this stitch is going to be the Tunisian simple stitch, and you just insert your hook behind that top leg of the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And that's it. You're going to repeat this in every one of the vertical stitches of the row. So we're going to go through over this way. It's so nice to see you guys chatting on here too. So Steve answering to Habiba and everybody, so thank you. I really was totally terrified that there was going to be nobody here when I showed up for the live. So I was like, what am I going to do if no one shows up? So thank you everybody for showing up. All right, so once you've got your row complete, it's just another return pass. And if anyone is just barely joining, we're just making our swatch. So, and this is going to help us determine our shrink rate for our stitch. All right, and for this one, we're just going to do all 5. Oh, wait, hold on. So I use a similar formula considered to use certain types of, oh no, and it went. It does help. Thank you, Isla. Sorry, I wasn't able to read through the whole comment, but I think everybody can see your comment. So go back to Isla's comment. She's got some really awesome information there. Oh, thank you, Habiba. I love you so much. I can't wait to meet you someday. We have to set that up. All right, so for row number 3, it's just a row of purl stitches. So again, just reverse yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, and then just purl. So I'm just going to move a little bit quicker on these purl stitches, simply because we've already done them. So if you're here, you've probably done these a lot. So here we go. I'm going to stand so I can make sure that you guys can actually see what I'm seeing on the camera. But now I'm stitching through the camera, so it's kind of hard to see what I'm doing. Okay, here, and then we've got the last stitch. All right, and then our return pass. So all we have left are the 2 lace rows. So we'll complete those 2, and that will give us the 5-row repeat that we need, which would be a fairly decent sample size. Now, if you want to get a more accurate read for how much yarn you could potentially need, I do suggest you do maybe like a 4-inch square or a 10 centimeter square. But for our purposes, we're just going to do this one. It also just makes it a little bit easier for a live video. All right. So I'm constantly thinking of things I want to Tunisian talk. Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, just talk to me about them. Leave them in the comments. Shoot me an email. I'm going to try to do more of these live videos, and now that I can see that the comments, like, they pop up right here on my screen, I can actually chat with you guys, which I don't get to do that in the videos, so this is really fun. All right, so for row number 4, we're going to Tunisian simple stitch these 2, vertical stitch number 2 and 3 together. So for this, you just pick up the top leg of the first one and the top leg of the second one, yarn over, and pull up a loop. In order to maintain our stitch count, we're going to need to yarn over since we used 2 vertical stitches, and then we repeat in all of the other stitches. Let's see, a measurement question. Do you ever use waist as well as shoulder? Asking how to do to size of your shoes, if not, pay attention. Yes, you can. So I'll continue the stitch as we chat, and this is just the Tunisian simple stitch 2 together, and then yarn over, Tunisian simple stitch 2 together. Yes, you can use a waist measurement if you're going to be making a more bespoke project and you want it to be more form-fitting, or you have a different, you don't have a typical, I don't know, not a typical, you don't have like, I guess, the hourglass figure you typically see in like different patterns and diagrams and stuff like that, then yes, you're going to need to do the waist measurement. Sorry, one of the landscaping guys is outside letting me know he might turn on a machine. So I'm sorry if it gets a little loud. That was totally unexpected. So if that's the case, so say you have, which actually is a great question too, because this will answer the question about bust as well and why we are using different measurements for the front and the back. So if you have to adjust for just different sizes, so say you are, I don't know, a bigger top size. So here we're here. Wow, I drew that I think better with my left hand. So say you're, I don't know, like a double D or a larger bust size, then you definitely want to use the bust. And you can at that point use the waist. You are going to have to include decreases if you're bigger at the bust than you are at the hips. So, and then if you're wider at the shoulders than you are at the bust, then just kind of go with the bigger measurement. And then as you get more practice, you can start using decreases, and then you can use other measurements as well to determine where your decreases are going to be. So that's a really great question, and I think we should totally explore that more. So I'll work on a pattern where we actually do that and start adjusting more for that. Or maybe we'll do another live and kind of adjust as we go. But for this one, it's really very simple, so that's where we're kind of going with this one. But yes, you can use your waist measurement, you can use your bust measurement, shoulders. Oh, my pleasure, Steve. Thanks for asking. Any of the measurements that you need in order to adjust. But with a pattern like this one, where it's just the 2 blocks that you're sewing together. So here, hold on. So when you're doing the 2 blocks like this one, and then we're going to sew one over the other one, then go with whatever the widest measurement is. That'll generally give you a bit more space and just a bit more flexibility or ease with your project. So, you know, you get a better fit, a more comfortable fit. So I don't know if that made it any clearer, but we will address this more because it's a very interesting question, and I'd like to explore this more. So I'll try to come up with, maybe for our next project, we can do something with like a very simple stitch. Do maybe just like knit stitch, and then go ahead and do that. Let's see. Shoulder would work best for my fluffy areas. This is great. Oh, great. I'm glad that helped. But yeah, so that's why I'm using the back is just going to be my back measurement, so like my shoulder measurement, and then the front has the bust to accommodate for the added size. So there we go. All right, moving back to, here we go, our stitch. Where were we? We just had to return pass. All right, so then we just return pass. There we go. And I'm losing pieces here. My pencil's going everywhere. All right, and the last row for our small sample, we're going to yarn over. So it's going to be the inverse of what we just did here. So we're going to inverse by beginning with the yarn over, and then you do the Tunisian simple stitch 2 together. So grab these 2, and then simple stitch them together. So yarn over, simple stitch, yarn over, simple stitch. So for row number 4, you started with the Tunisian simple stitch, or not, yes, the Tunisian simple stitch 2 together. I swear, these names are just so long. And then you end in a yarn over, but for row number 5, you begin with a yarn over, and you don't do one here at the end. So when you do your Tunisian simple stitch 2 together, you omit that yarn over since you did it at the beginning of the row. And that will just kind of offset the 2, creating like the lacy look. Alright, so we did the Tunisian simple stitch 2 together, and then you pull up this last loop, and then you just work your return pass. Alright, so that's it for our tiny swatch. And then if you want, well, you know, we'll cover the bind off since we're here. The bind off is just the same one that you guys have seen. If you watch the tutorial for that one, it's just the Tunisian simple stitch 2 together. No, not the 2 together, it's just Tunisian simple stitch across. So with every vertical stitch, except for this first one, so go into the second one, you're just going to Tunisian simple stitch and then close as a single crochet. So once you have those 2 loops on your hook, you just single crochet close. And that's going to create that nice little border at the end. So that's how you would bind off. So I'll just continue to bind off here. So going back to determining how much yarn you're going to need, once you've got your bind off and your small swatch is set, if you have a digital scale, which is what I would recommend. If you don't, I'll talk more about that. But if you have a digital scale, make sure you weigh this small sample. So take the area of the sample. So we'll do that, do our knot. I won't cut it since I'm going to be using the same thing. So that's what I was saying about swatching. I typically don't cut it and just keep the small sample. I just take a look at it, determine if this is what I want. If it is, I keep it. If it's not, you know, well, not keep it, I guess. I remember what it is I did. So I keep the hook that I used and then continue to use it for the actual garment. If it isn't, I'll pull it out, switch hooks, and do it again, and just determine what I want my fabric to look like, and then I continue from there. But once you have your swatch, put it on your digital scale, see how much it is, and then get the area of this small sample, and that will give you about how much yarn you're going to need. So translate that to the area of your measurements and go from there. If you don't have a digital scale, you're going to have to measure the yarn. So at this point, either like draw something on here or cut it, and then you're going to have to pull out your sample. So take the area of the sample with the swatch. If you want to, this garment itself isn't going to need blocking. So because since we're going to stitch it together, everything's just going to fall into place. But if you want to block it, you could block it. I don't typically block the samples or the swatches unless it's something that really curls up. So if you do something with knit stitch and it's like that, then yes, you can go ahead and block it, and that will definitely help. But thank you for asking. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, so at this point, yes, you would probably cut your yarn, and then you have to pull it out, take a tape measure, and actually measure how much yarn you used if you're going to be using yardage instead of weight. But that's kind of a lengthier process, so that's that. All right, but once you have your swatch, I almost pulled it out too, and we needed to take the measurement. So once you've got this, you're going to take your tape measure again, and we're going to measure it and see how much we lost in length. Some stitches shrink, other stitches don't. That's why swatching is going to save you. So we're going to go through, measure that. Go. And we lost about a ½ inch, approximately, because our initial chain was 3 inches. You can see here that it's just a tiny bit longer. And now that our swatch is ready, see, we're measuring about half of it. And yeah, it's about ½ inch. So to be on the safe side, I'm going to add an inch to some of my measurements, and I'll tell you which ones here in a second. Basically anything that determines width. So I don't need to worry about it for the length. So the length of the garment itself, I don't need to add anything to it. I also don't need to add anything to the length of the sleeve, but I will need to add an inch to the shoulder width, the armhole width, the wrist. We'll decrease to that, so that one's not a problem, and we can try it on as we go. But what else? And the bust. I'm looking at the kids' measurements, but I have the bust here on the adult one that I don't have on hers. But yeah, so the measurements that determine the width of your garment, you are going to need to, wait, hold on. Steve said, if you doing a stitch tighter and denser fabric, yeah, it probably would curl. If you're using also like the smaller hook and everything, you would more than likely get curl. Depending on what stitches you use as well, some combinations of stitches keep your fabric from curling. So if you're using something like a combination between Tunisian simple stitch and purl stitches, for instance like a honeycomb stitch, you might not get a lot of curl, especially if you use a bigger hook so that there's a little bit more spacing between the stitches. It might lay a little more flat than if you're doing something like a Tunisian knit, or yeah, the knit stitch. It also has to do with where the placement of the stitch is, and by that I mean if you're using the front leg for all of the stitches and there's no added weight, because like a purl stitch is heavier than a Tunisian simple stitch, even though you're using the front leg, so it'll lay a little bit more flat, if that makes any sense. And then just different combinations of stitches will help you keep your fabric flat. So I don't know if that was clear or not, but I'm trying here. All right, so we've got our swatch. We figured out we need to add about anywhere between 1/2 inch to 1 inch in width so that our garment will actually fit once we're done with it. So, you know, jot that down, put that wherever you need. Here we go, I had a pencil, so I'm just going to put +1 here on my notes if I don't run out of lead. So I'm just going to do +1 inch width so I don't forget. There we go. And then I'm going to have to do it again tomorrow for the kids. So, you know, I may need 1 inch, I may not, because it's going to be a different yarn weight, which is something else that you need to keep in mind. Just because you did the swatch in 1 yarn using, you know, number 3 yarn and then whatever hook you're using, doesn't necessarily mean that that is the same shrink rate you're going to get with a different yarn weight. So you're going to have to swatch again and just measure it. It doesn't need to be a ginormous swatch. I mean, this one worked just fine. Again, maybe a 4x4 square or a 10 centimeter square would be a little more accurate. So yeah. Oh, well, thank you. That can be on. Oh, well, thank you so much. I hope so. I'm super nervous. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but I'm not the greatest live speaker. And even though I can't actually like physically see you guys, I know you guys are there, so it still makes me pretty nervous. It'll go away, I'm sure. If you watch any of my first tutorials, my voice was always shaking in them. It was pretty bad. Alright, so now that we've determined that, we can start with either the front or the back panel. At this point, it doesn't really matter because they're going to be rectangles. So we're just going to make a chain that is the width. Let's go with the back panel, why not? It's going to be the width of our shoulders because that's what we're going to be using for that panel. And then I don't think I've got, it's still the same crew. So, you know, you saw kind of how we're going to be building those panels. So we're going to do the width of the shoulders plus 1 inch, at least in my case, plus 1 inch. If you had a different shrink rate, then use whatever shrink rate you got, whether it was, you know, the 1/2 inch, the 2 inches, or add whatever you want from there, just to make it a looser fit or whatever you want. So it's just the same process that we did before. So just, you're going to use your slip knot and then make your chain. So I'm just going to sit here and do that. And make sure that you keep your multiples in mind. This is even multiples. And then jot down. That's another thing. Always jot down how many stitches you used in case you want to make a second garment in the same size or whatever. That way you don't have to do this process necessarily all over again if you're using the same hook and the same yarn. So just jot those down. It helps. The same as the number of rows. Keep track of how many rows you did, because when you do your front and back panel, that's another thing to keep in mind too. When you do your front and back panel, you can use the same row count unless you have like a larger bust size to account for or anything like that. So, you know, say you're a double D, then when you take that measurement for the length, make sure that you go over anything that could add potentially add length to your garment. And that way it'll keep the length even, and you won't end up with the front of your sweater really, really short and the back is a lot longer, unless that's the look you're going for, in which case, you know, have at it. But yeah, so we'll make our chain, and we can chat while we do this if we want to. But we have, let's see, 1, we got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 7, 8, 9, 40. So let's measure it here at about 40. Oh, congratulations, Habiba! That's so exciting! What do you do? And do you know? Boy, girl, do you want to know? Let's see, so we got 13.5 inches. So remember, I'm going with 15 was my shoulder, and then I'm adding an inch, so I need a 16-inch chain. Oh, something else that you could do as well, which I heard, I don't even remember where I heard it several years ago. You can also use a smaller hook size. If you know that your shrink rate is about like an inch or whatever, you can also decrease your hook by anywhere between 1 to 1.5 millimeters, and that'll help keep your chain the length it needs to be, and you don't have to add that extra inch. February. Oh, that's so exciting! Well, congratulations. February is going to be super exciting. We're going to have to start making a whole bunch of baby garments then. Alright, so let's see, we're at 40. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm just going to go with 50. I think that's going to be a little bit wider than what I need, but loose sweaters are comfy sweaters, so, you know, why not? No, that's about. It's a tiny bit. It's what, about 16.5 inches? Yeah, let's go with that. So that's going to be the width of my panel. And then from there, you just start crocheting your rows. So just to do the recap, and that way you guys don't have to refer to the video tutorial for the stitch, unless you want to. If you do, then it's square number 13 in the Tunisian Afghan series. But you've got even multiples. Oh man, I'm running like sideways too. So it's even multiples. And then you need a foundation row. So found. And then I'm running like totally straight here. Let's see if I can, oh well, let's see. Row 1 is purl, so all purl stitches. Row 2, this is terrible. Alright, Tunisian simple stitch. Can you still see on the screen? Yeah, row 3 is another purl stitch row. And then row 4 is Tunisian simple stitch 2 together. And then yarn over. And then remember, you're going to end in a yarn over. Row number 5 is going to be yarn over, and then Tunisian simple stitch 2 together. And then when you end in a Tunisian simple stitch 2 together without that yarn over. So here, well, I'm not going to move it, because if I move the tripod, it's going to make a loud noise and everything. So that's the stitch we're going to be using. And then you just repeat rows 1 through 5 over and over. So go 5 and then start again at 1 until you get the length that you want for that back piece. And then when you do the front piece, since we've already done, I mean, it's just the squares. We won't cover that for the next live. The next live will focus on doing the sleeves, and that way we can, you know, determine where you're going to do your decreases and all that fun stuff. I've kind of drafted out some notes, which we can kind of go over if you want to. But then we can determine all of this fun stuff for the sleeves, and then talk about sewing and all of that. So we can do that for the next live. But let me erase this, and then we'll just kind of talk a little bit about it in case, you know, it helps anyone or any of you guys are getting ahead and trying to get your garment done. Once you create your pieces, so at least what I'm going to try to do for this is when I end, I don't want to create a trim, because that's another part of when you're designing any kind of garment pattern. If you decide that you want a trim, you know, you can account for that also in the measurements. So if you want like a wide trim or anything like that, just some edging at the bottom of your sweater or your cuffs, then, you know, determine how wide you want it to be, and then keep that in mind when you're taking all of your, or when you're using all of your measurements for your garment. Because I like the edging in this one, so where's my sample? I had it over here. Because I think the edge is really nice on this one, because it'll create an edge just like this one. I don't want to necessarily add any kind of trimming to it. This is going to be the bottom part of the sweater, since you've got the purl, Tunisian simple, the purl, and then all of the lacing. So this is going to be the bottom part. So when I end my rows, or when I end that square, so my back panel and my front panel, I'm going to end on the purl, Tunisian simple stitch, purl. So in the first 3 rows of this stitch. That way the top part and the bottom part are even, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the cuff, just so I don't have to add any additional stitching to it. But, you know, as you go, you can determine if that's something that you want to do. So once you have your garment, like your 2 pieces together, and then you layer them and all of that, if you want to add any kind of edging to the bottom or to the neckline, that would be a good time to do it once you sew all the pieces together, because then you could just work in the round, and it saves you a headache instead of having to do it on this piece and then putting them together and stitching them, which is something I learned with the last sweater pattern that I worked on when I did it on the sleeves. It was really nice to have it done, but at the same time, it's easier when you can try garments on and then determine if you need to make the cuff a little bit smaller, make it a little bit wider, whatever it is, just so that you have a better fit. So, you know, live and learn. That's how it goes, I guess. But let's see. So yeah, from here on out, we just work rows 1 through 5 until we get any squares, or until we have our square. So aside from that, I don't know. Does anyone have any questions or anything? Do we want to keep working on this together? Do we want to end the live stream here? Do we want to, I don't know, set up a time for the next one, because I was thinking maybe giving us a week and then doing this again next Monday at about the same time, and that way we can work on the sleeve. Oh, that's what I was going to talk about, the sleeve. I don't know, let me know what you guys want to do. Shaping the neck, how would you go about shaping the neck line or armholes? Alright, so for the neck, I'll start there first. Let me grab my sample. Here, I'll do 2 of these. So, I'll get rid of the pole. Yeah, these are all the little swatches for our Afghan. Alright, so once you have your 2 pieces, so you've got your back piece and your front piece, lay them on top, and then you're going to pin it. So just put a pin at about, I would start with about 1 inch, whether you're making this, you know, for someone who's younger, someone like a smaller size, like my kid who's 7, then I'm going to make her one, or me, start at 1 inch and then just pin it and go try it on. So stand in front of the mirror, try it on, make sure that that is the drape you want. If you want it a little bit closer, then move your pin. If you want it a little bit less, then move your pin the other way, and just determine where it is you want it and how wide a drape you want. And then once you've done that, count the stitches to make sure that you have the same number of stitches on both sides, and place your pins at that point, so that it's even on both sides. While you're at it, you can also measure the armhole. So for the armhole, since we have the measurement in a circumference, so just all the way around, fold your measuring tape in half. So mine was, what did I say it was? 15 inches? No questions. Oh, thank you so much. You're so sweet. I love you guys. All of you guys are all amazingly sweet. You just make me feel so loved, so thank you. Alright, so I need 15 inches, so I'm going to line this up and then just hold this flat and hold it up against, this is so tiny, hold it up against the actual sweater itself, and then place a pin right where that measurement is. And it's only half because remember you've got the front and back, so it's going to be the circumference this way. So just use half of that measurement, pin it, and then again try it on and adjust it as you need to. While you adjust it, so let's say we put the pin, I didn't bring any, I should have brought some of my pins. So say we placed it at the 15-inch mark, and we determined that it is not wide enough, or that we want it wider because, you know, we tried it on with a t-shirt and that's how we're going to wear it. Then move the pin to where you want it, and then bring it back to your table, and then lay it flat again and adjust the size. So if you wanted it bigger, adjust it, lay it flat, and see where you're at that point. This is going to be the new width of your sleeve panel. So when you make the top of the trapezoid for the sleeve, your initial chain is going to be at the top, and then you're going to work your way down so we can do the decreases. Instead of it being, you know, the 15 inches, now it's going to be, you know, 18 inches. Or if you wanted it smaller, it'll be, you know, 12 inches or whatever that measurement was. Jot that down and adjust it on your measurement chart so that you have, so that your sleeve will actually fit into the armhole of your garment. And then, yeah, so as far as the decreases and everything go, we'll play around with those in our next live. That way we'll make the sleeve together and it'll be fun. So that we can kind of determine where we're going to place those. I have kind of done a preliminary like notes of where I want the decreases to go, because I don't want this to be a super tight sleeve. So some folks like really tight sleeves. I don't really like them that much. So I kind of like a bit of a wider one. So when you make your sleeve and you have the trapezoid, where is it? Here, we'll go this way so you can see it a little bit better. So when you have your trapezoid, there you go. And I said it was going to be 15 inches across. And then I said this was going to be, what, 23 in length. This is no better. You guys cannot see my handwriting. I promise I write a lot neater than this when it's actually on, you know, pen and paper. This is terrible. Alright, that's a 23. And then this, we said it was going to be, did I say 8 or 7? I think I said it was going to be 8. So we got 8 inches. So, kind of just in general, my rule of thumb is just to do at least 4 decreases. So divide this length by 4. So go to, or did I have 24? Where was it? My arm length. Oh, that was my arm length. Yeah, so this was 24. Sorry, I used the wrong number. So here we go. Let's try to make this a little bit neater. So 24. There, that's more visible. Okay, So divide this by 4. If it's not evenly divisible by 4, just round it up or round it down so that you can, or get, as close as you possibly can. And that'll kind of tell you where to place your stitch, or your decreases. So that way you have the 4 decreases. So you got one here, so you got this one, this one, this one, this one, and then typically one a lot closer to the cuff. And that way you'll have a nice even decrease. It's going to be measurement based, so whatever, you got, which is what, like 6? So every 6 inches or so, you're going to place your decreases. So here, here, and here. But we'll play around with moving it because you don't necessarily want a decrease like right at the cuff. We want it a little bit further up, and then 6 inches is kind of a big length to leave. I mean, where's my measuring tape? Yeah, I don't want to get marker all over my yarn, which I totally did. Oh well. So I mean, that's a big length to have the sleeve without any decreases. So this is when you get to start having a little bit of fun. There we go. With the sleeve, and then just kind of move it around. So instead of placing your first decrease at about 6 inches, you might go with like 3 inches, and then do it every 6 inches after that. So start at 3 inches, and then like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Your next decrease would be at 9, and then at 15, and then at 21. And then since our sleeve is going to be 24 inches, you still have those 3 inches at the bottom where you don't have that decrease. So just kind of how you play around with the sleeve. And as always, you have to try that on. So if you're making it for yourself, it's a lot easier to just kind of try it and see if it fits. If you're not, that's why you have these measurements here at the bottom. So as you go down it, you make sure that you are staying within these measurements so that it is the 15 across. And if you get to like your third decrease and you're already less than 8 inches, you need to readjust your decreases. So that's a lot of what I end up doing with the pattern writing. You just have to play with it and build it over and over and over again. So it's pretty time consuming, but it's also really rewarding. And you can, create the pattern however it is you want. So if you want a tight sleeve, you can decrease more often or not as often or whatever you want. So yeah, but that's part of the fun part of pattern writing, and I think why I like it so much. It didn't used to be something I thoroughly enjoyed. It was terrifying. When I first started, it was terrifying to write a pattern because I never knew how it was going to end up, and then how I was going to adjust it for different sizes, because there's all of the different knitting patterns and the crochet patterns that have just different sizing measurements and everything, but they don't always fit. Like some of the medium or smaller sizes, they very rarely actually fit me comfortably. So, oh, what is this? Let's see. Oh, see, yeah, I totally hear you when you make the garment, whatever sizing it is on the pattern, and then it ends up not fitting. Yeah, it sucks. It's probably one of the saddest things when you have to frog nearly an entire project. That's why, I try to write these patterns oh, well, thank you. I don't know, I hope so. I hope I'm, covering everything. Because it's a little not difficult. It's different to try to explain the process just like this, without any sort of preparation. Okay, I mean, I kind of drew out some notes, but yeah. Let's see, I step into the measurement diet, swatch info on paper and wine. If issue notes. That is a really good suggestion. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Yep, I'll keep working on some of these. This is, the first time I've tried to do this, so it's okay, let's figure out how to do it without all of the editing and the music and the notes, and see if we can go, build it as we go, and especially because I get feedback from you guys in real time, so I know what to think about or what to look at in future patterns, so just kind of what to cover, because sometimes I don't know, and then I'll create the video, and 2 months down the line, somebody's like, oh, this would have been great, and at that point, I can't go back and edit the tutorial, so I have to make a new one with, but this way, I have the information ahead of time, and I can start covering these things, but yeah, so, I don't know, so that's kind of all I have for you guys today. We filled that was an entire hour. We're at 57 minutes. This is awesome. I didn't think I'd actually have that much. Oh, well, thank you so much. I didn't think we'd actually have so much to cover, and again, I was terrified that nobody was going to show up, so I'd stand here, just doing another video on my own. So thank you, everyone, for showing up. It's been really fun. Oh, thank you, Steve. I look forward to it too. So yeah, I'm thinking next week to give everybody time, including myself, since I'm going to be making 2 of these, enough time to finish your front panels. So we'll work on the sleeve next Monday, also at noon. We'll work on the sleeve, and then we'll do. So have your 2 panels ready. Don't sew them or anything. We're going to do that at the end. But have your 2 panels ready, and then we'll go from there. Make sure that you do try them on in the mirror though. So pin everything, try it on, and make sure that it is the size that you want, because you do have an entire week to go through, and if you need to frog it, you need to adjust it, you can go from there. But yes, so I don't know if you guys have any questions here for the end of this, but I think at this point, since I just have to sit and crochet all of this, if you guys want to sit and chat, we can. Otherwise, we can call it a day, and yeah, and see each other again next week.